My name is Alan Nielsen. I was born and raised in Mormon fundamentalism, and I became a Mormon in the mainstream Mormon Church. And now I'm a Christian. I've been out of the church for over 7 years, and now I'm actually an elder in a Christian church. I was born right here in Salt Lake City, raised in a Mormon fundamentalist family. My earliest recollections were that, we were different. We were different from the world. Speaking of our neighbors and people around us, and some of my earliest recollections, I knew that the Mormon Church. So when I say the church, a lot of times what I'm referring to is the mainstream Mormon Church. So I knew they were there, but I knew that we were different. From the time I was younger, we were always told that we were the Lord's special people because we had a special work to do that was important. So they didn't want me to speak with the neighbors. I wasn't supposed to make friends with people. We were supposed to we were just kind of keep to ourselves and not really have a lot of interaction. And so as I grew up, that was kind of the environment. It was like everybody out there could potentially have your father go to jail, is what I was told, because in 1953 they had a raid on Short Creek, Arizona, and they sent some of the men that were practicing polygamy to jail for a period of time. And so that was fresh on everybody's minds. This was in 53. And so it wasn't too many years prior to that they were actually putting some people that were practicing polygamy in jail. So it was still fresh, and so there was that environment that you don't want your father to go to jail, and so don't talk. Those people out there, you never know what if they find out how we're living. So we were just supposed to keep really quiet about that. As a child, it's the only thing you know. When you're young and that's what you're told, you don't know that there's a normal. That is your only normal. And so that was what it was. I just remember we lived in downtown Salt Lake City when my earliest recollections on 4th South. And I remember walking out in the front yard and just seeing all the cars go by. And sometimes a car would drive really slow, and I thought maybe that was like the FBI or something. And they were coming, and then I would run in the house. So there was that fear element of just that something could happen. And then, as we got older, my dad was practicing polygamy before I was born. He married my mom and her sister shortly within a couple of years. And so when I was younger, that's all I knew was polygamy, even though at the time we lived in a different home. I was in this apartment on 4th South, and the other lady lived in another place not too far away. And I don't have really strong recollections that I didn't understand the whole polygamy thing, because when we'd go over there, I kind of thought that the other half brothers and sisters were like cousins, because I just kind of thought of them like cousins. I guess it didn't quite dawn on me at the time until I was in about close to kindergarten. When I would have gone to kindergarten, my dad combined the families, and they moved us all into one home in Salt Lake City. And then that's when it was more real. That now we're one family living together in this one home. And then as the school year started, I was now going into 1st grade. And so we had a school to the north that was called Woodrow Wilson Elementary, and then there was a school to the south, which was Roosevelt Elementary. And so my dad had the children from the first family go to Roosevelt, go south, and then me and my siblings from my mom, we went north to Woodrow Wilson, so that it wouldn't cause any kind of concern at the school, because we were two different schools. And then also my dad, because of that concept of the fear of prison and jail and all that kind of stuff, I had a fictitious last name. So my last name was Collins. And my dad actually had that The birth certificates all said Collins of the family from my mom. because my mom was actually the second wife, even though she was older than her sister, but she married him 2 years later. So she was technically the second wife, and so the first wife obviously took the last name, his last name, and those kids went by that last name, and then I went to the as Collins. So I was Alan Collins. I went to Woodrow Wilson Elementary School, and I knew that we were a family now, and we were counseled before we would start the school year. Do not say anything about your family life. You don't invite friends over. You don't have anything to do with that, because this is how, if you're not careful, your father will go to jail. And so these were the kinds of things the fear that was there. And I knew that I wasn't really Collins, but I didn't quite understand all the ramifications of why we're doing that. I just was doing what I was supposed to do. And so, but as you go to school now, you start to try and make friends. And so I remember I had some of the kids say, "Hey, can I come over to your house?" And I would immediately just freeze, just like, no, you can't. And so you do that after so many times, and pretty soon you're kind of that odd kid, the one that just no one wants to hang out with, no one wants to, because you can't go to their house, they can't come to your house, and it made it difficult growing up and going into the public school system and not being able to talk about your family, not even be able to make friends, because if you get too close to them, they want to know your business, and we were told not to let that out. And so it was kind of hard for that, and I didn't make a lot of friends in school. So as I grew up in that environment, living in that home together as one family now, it was just, that was the difficult side of it. And then as I got older, I was just doing I thought this was the truth, as like anybody is how they're raised, or think we are God's special people. And we knew we had neighbors across the street who were from the Mormon Church, the mainstream church. And we knew that they lived a different life than us. The way that my dad had us, mainly even the sister's dress was very, very conservative, kind of almost looking like some of the Quakers, a little bit of that dress. Not all polygamous families did that, but my dad was very much that way, and so we definitely stood out, and we were odd, which was also very difficult. When you're just trying to make friends, you're just this strange family, and people kind of back away from you just because of that. And but as I got older, my dad let us know that we had been invited to go to a private school where we wouldn't have to hide our lifestyles and that. And this was a school that was run by one of his leaders who they considered an apostle. And it was at his home, and they had a large home, and this is where they actually held their church services. It was a very big home, and it had a huge room that could fit probably upward of 200 people in the room. It was designed to be able to have their sort of worship service, I guess you could say. And in the basement, they started a school, and so it was like a private school. It was at the base of the canyon, where Snowbird and Alta is, just right up in that area. Okay, so that became the where we started going to school at that, and now I became Alan Nielsen. I wasn't Collins anymore. So and everybody that attended the school was of the same belief system, and so we didn't have to hide our life. But also everybody came from all over the valley, and so it wasn't the same of being able to go to someone's house, because it was spread out all over the valley. But at that school was Rulon Jeffs was it was his home, and his son Warren Jeffs was actually he was one of the teachers and kind of one of the leaders of the school. And so I got really familiar with him when I was younger, and he taught, I think it was math and a course that they called priesthood history, which was it's kind of like an indoctrination type of thing of the fundamentalist beliefs, you know. They actually had some things where you were almost catechized in a way of these little things we had to memorize and go over and talk about. And so I got very familiar with some of the principles of the more extreme Mormonism and the fundamentalist side of things, and things like, you know, that Adam is our father and God, and all some of this kind of stuff that the average Mormon person would have never heard about. And so we were almost like catechized on that kind of stuff in that class that they called priesthood history. So I became very familiar with that. But they also had a very strict rules and guidelines for any kind of interaction with the opposite sex. That was forbidden, because the way they dealt with things is when you were ready for marriage, they would have their leaders pick a spouse for you, and that was the way it was supposed to be. And they would say that this was for the sake of the Lord is actually going to tell you who you're going to marry, and he will do it via these apostles and prophets that the Lord will speak to them, and they will then tell you who you're supposed to marry. And they would tell us that if you try to interfere with that, you're messing up the plans that God has set up. So you are not supposed to have any kind of association. So they really did a lot of effort to keep the boys and the girls separate, and so we wouldn't, you know, have this kind of interaction. As that went on, when I was the first thing I can remember when I started to be kind of rebel a little bit from that was about age of 14. They also had at my dad's home what they would call a fireside, and it was a group where the young people would get together, just the young people, and it would be kind of like presided over by one of the leaders, and in this case, because it was my dad's home, he would be there and to kind of monitor them, but they would turn over the night to the young people and let them kind of run it and have their song and have their thing. But they had it set up so that the boys sat on this side and the girls sat on that side, and there was no intermingling, and they made sure of that. That was pretty that didn't happen, or at least they tried. So that was an expectation that you when you got to be, I think it was the initiation was 13, is you were invited to come to what they called fireside. And so it was something that it was kind of like a benchmark when you got to, now I'm old enough to go to fireside. So it was something you would kind of look forward to, because now you're getting older and you're not one of those little kids. But I did that for about a year, and then I started really having trouble. And it was due to this whole idea of the placement marriage thing, and that's what they called it, is placement marriages. I started to be bothered by that. Because I didn't like the idea that somebody else would choose for me who I was going to spend the rest of my life with, and in Mormon theology, the rest of eternity with, at least, the first one. So I was bothered by that, and I can remember when my brothers and I were younger, we used to kind of talk among ourselves about this kind of thing, and when believing that this was the way it was to be, and we would talk about, oh man, I don't want to marry her, and stuff like that. So we had what we called our little sweat list. She's on the sweat list, I don't want to marry her. And then there's the ones that were ideal. Oh man, I hope I marry that one. And so we would just kind of have this little conversation back and forth. It was funny when I think about it now, of so-and-so's on the sweat list, because we were sweating it out that, oh no, what if I get placed with that person? I don't know how I'm going to deal with that. So anyway, I started thinking about that as I got older, because now when you're 14, you're starting to think a little bit more along those lines of the opposite sex, and I started thinking, I don't want somebody to pick for me. And so about the time I was just about 15, so I was still 14, but I was almost 15, I made a decision that I was going to rebel. against that idea, and I did it kind of more subtly. So what I thought I would do is I figured I've got to send a message, so I won't attend their fireside, and they would have it once a month on a Friday. And if I don't attend the fireside, then my dad's gonna be there, and he'll see that I'm not there, and then it's gonna set something off, but it'll be my little statement. And so that's what I did. I purposely stayed out doing something else till later, till after it started, and came home, and the whole time I'm feeling this angst, because I'm knowing that this is like rebellion. And I'm feeling that angst, but I felt like I had to do something. And so, sure enough, after it was over, I knew it was coming, and I sat in my room, and here he comes walking in the room. He says, why didn't you go to fireside? And so I just told him I didn't want to really go into all the details. I just told him I just want to do my own thing now, And so he talked to me for a little while. We never really reached any kind of decision about what was going to go on forward. But I think he got the idea that that I'm starting to not see things like he was seeing. And so when that first went down, I remember this is a memory that kind of sticks in my mind. Is I remember feeling keenly that I'm rebelling against God. And it was harder than it seems like it would be when I tell the story to people. They'd say, oh man, I'm just glad you got out of that crazy mess. But when you're growing up in it and you're taught that this is God and this is what you're supposed to do, I was like disobeying God in a sense. And it was hard for me to think, I don't want to be disobedient to God, but I don't want to do this. And I remember feeling the feelings of like, I think I'm going to hell, and this is not good, but I persisted and went forward. And as I got older, each year went by, it got easier, and I didn't feel those stings and stuff like that. And then when I was, as I got closer to 18, my life got very stressful at home because I didn't go to their church services on Sundays. I didn't go to the firesides. I was pretty much had nothing to do with the religion, so to speak. So I was pretty much in open rebellion, but I was still living at home, and had a lot of run-ins with my dad, and it wasn't always the best. It didn't go too well, and he would be very forceful about saying, that you can't do this, and he was just trying to bear down as much force as he could to get me to break, and I just wouldn't. And so at times I remember saying to him, then I'll just move out, and he said, you can't because you're not 18. And I thought he knew something that I didn't, so I thought, well, he's probably right. But I knew that the law was when you're 18, you can move out. Your parents really can't do anything about it. And so that was kind of what I did. I just thought, well, when I'm 18, then I'll move out. And that's what I did. When I it wasn't right after I was 18, but shortly after, I moved out of the house and just thought I was going to do what I wanted to do. The mainline church always in my mind was lesser than even us, because they were like a watered down version of us. So yeah, they're doing their thing, and it's a much better life. They get to choose their own person that they marry and all that kind of stuff. They get to go to sports and have all the fun and do. That was nice, and that felt better, but it was just like, but yet they still believe what we believe in Joseph Smith, the Book of Mormon, and all this kind of stuff. But they're just milk toast, and we're really believers. And so in my mind, I kind of wrote the whole thing off as just like thinking, well, I'm leaving this because I can't live this way. But if I go to the Mormon Church, I'm still, in my mind, I was thinking I'm still believing this. It's just the milquetoast version. It's just the watered down, weak version. And so I I kind of just didn't even pay much attention to the LDS people that much at that particular time in my life. But when I was 18, I did move out, and I kind of just was, okay, now I'm 18, I'm out on my own. Now it's that time when you just say, now I can do whatever I want. And it's funny when I think back because, that's freedom, right? I'm free. And I'm going to hell anyway, and so I think I may as well just kind of have some fun, And so some of the friends that I had developed over the few years, they would want to go drinking, and so we'd go drinking, and so that's what we did. And I kind of lived that party life, and I did that from 18 through 19, and most of from 18 until about 20, I was just like, hey, I'm going to hell, so I'm living the party life. Near the end of or about midway through my 19th year, I just started getting a little dissatisfied because the semi-hedonist type of life I was living was just empty. There was nothing there, and I wasn't fulfilled at all. I had no value to life, and it was just hard. And my dad had, when I was 15 years old, I finished through 8th grade, and he said, you don't need any more school. Let's get you a job. And when you tell that to a 15-year-old, it's like, you don't need a school? Okay. And so I just, and so when I did leave, I was very ill-educated and not in a good place at all to be on my own. I really wasn't. But I persevered through it and just did my best and found work and did things what I could. But this semi-hedonist lifestyle that I was living was just empty. So I started kind of just wondering things about life a little bit. And I had one of the guys that I was working for, he is my wife's uncle. And he was actually in the mainstream Mormon Church. And so I started working for him because I had met my wife's brother, and he worked for him. And so I started working for him and got to know his family and got to know my wife's family a little bit. And so I started to do a little bit of association with my wife's family, and they were also Mormon fundamentalists, but they weren't the hardline, rigid fundamentalists that I grew up with. In fact, my wife's dad, he would allow them to date. They had just a lot more freedom, and the girls didn't have to dress like Quakers, and they looked more normal. However, they still wanted them to find spouses that were in the belief system. They didn't want them to just go outside of that. So, but anyway, I started hanging out with that family, and so that kind of got me thinking a little bit more about my life. And so, and over time, I started to talk to them and to her father, and she has a lot of uncles, and they would all gather together on a Sunday and have a Sunday school in one of the uncles' homes. And so they invited me to come to the Sunday school. And so I started to kind of revisit the idea of religion, I guess, and thinking, well, maybe, because this other was pretty empty. And so I kind of started to revisit that, and I would go to their Sunday school, and while I was getting to know my wife's family is where we met, and I liked the idea that I could date, and I could actually say, hey, do you want to go on a date, and we could go somewhere, and I could choose, and that was a big deal for me. And so I had kind of accepted that, well, maybe this idea of Mormon fundamentalism is true, But this way that my dad practiced it in the rigid lifestyle wasn't necessary. And so I started to kind of embrace that again. And by going to this Sunday school, I got kind of hearing some of the ideas that they had about life and the religion and the belief systems. And so I kind of got involved with it again. Only this time I didn't have to deal with all that restriction. And so we were married, and started to have children. And as time went on, I started to become a little bit dissatisfied with her family's Sunday school, because I started to see inconsistencies that they would teach and say, and it bothered me a little bit. And so I was kind of not really sure, and so I kind of went out on my own. I kind of thought, I'm just going to figure life out by myself. I'm not going to go to that Sunday school anymore. I'm just going to figure life out. And where I was working, I remember I was feeling the need for some kind of spiritual sustenance of some kind. And so I remember during the lunch hour, I would get in my truck and eat lunch, and I'd turn on the radio. I turned on the AM radio, and I found a Christian radio station. I don't remember the call numbers of it, but I remember there was 2 pastors on there, and I would listen to them give their sermons, and one was Charles Stanley, and the other was Chuck Swindoll. And I would listen to their messages, and it was refreshing to me, even though I thought, well, they're wrong on some things, but it was somewhat refreshing to me, and I got some spiritual sustenance out of that. But as time went on, I started to really be agitated, because in Mormon theology, when your children turn 8 is when you've got to think about, okay, I got to get them baptized and all this kind of stuff. And so the authority of the Mormon Church issue started to surface. And I thought, well, okay, what am I going to do now? I need to kind of know what to do, because by this time I'm a little bit confused with the fact that I'm definitely not going back to this extreme version that my dad was living. I'm never returning to that. I made that decision way back. And then my wife's family, there was some things that weren't quite making complete sense to me. And so I decided I got to find out. No one's going to find out for me. I got to find out. And so I started a study, and I thought, okay, I'm going to do a really deep study to find out what the truth is. The problem that I made was I only went back to the inside of Mormonism. So I made the assumption, the presupposition that Joseph Smith was right, the Book of Mormon was right, all of Mormonism was right, and in Mormon fundamentalism, the point of contention is when they gave up polygamy in 1890 with the manifesto. That's when the point of contention started with. That's when the Mormon fundamentalism kind of was born, is after that took place. And so I just went back to that point. So I'm like, okay, I got to find out, okay, what happened, because Joseph Smith, I believe that was all true. Now I got to find out what happened from that point on. And then I did this really deep study, spent years going over, you didn't have the internet back then, so it was a lot tougher to find the information. I had to go down to bookstores and hunt up stuff that wasn't, in the like the Deseret book, because you would never find this kind of stuff there. So I had to go. There was a place called Sam Weller Books, and I would go down there, and other places, Benchmark Books had a place, and I would go down there looking for these different material to find out what's going on. And so as I began to read and study some of the things, I was just like, wow. Something is so wrong, it doesn't make any sense, because what I found was this idea that my dad always professed that the Mormon Church didn't really give up polygamy in 1890. This was just to satisfy the world. They really continued to practice it. And I found that this was true, and all these things were true, And I just was confused because on one hand, it sounded like the leaders of the church, and from Wilford Woodruff when the manifesto was accepted, it sounded like what they were doing was they were saying this was a revelation from God, but that out of the other side of their mouth, they would tell their own people kind of like, whatever you do, we're going to turn the other way. Elbow, elbow, wink, wink, go ahead, God bless you, brother, you know. That's what it felt like. In some of the diaries and things that I would read, it's just like, something's not right here. So I was very confused. And that just reached a crescendo of just, I am so confused that I thought, I don't know what is right, because I could see some of the things in Mormon fundamentalism, they had a point, and then some of the mainstream Mormon Church had a point, but both of them, something was just dreadfully wrong. And so I was so bothered by it, I just felt like there was a point in time that I wanted to just leave the state, get out of Utah, and go some other state and just figure life out. Maybe even hook up with some Christian people, just simply because I'd got some sustenance when I was a young man from the Christians. I thought, well, I can maybe at least they have good values, is kind of what I thought in my mind. I could just raise a family there. I can't figure out this problem of what's going on. And so that just kind of kept escalating, and it really bothered me. But then the more study I did, I just didn't really have what I needed to actually go out on my own and do that. I was too grounded in Mormonism. I had that idea, and it was just a thought, but I don't think I really entertained it very deep. It was just a kind of a fleeting thought. So I kind of just went back to my roots and dug in. And after a while of studying, I finally just decided, you know what, I think I'm going to look into the Mormon Church, because they definitely have a stronger claim than the fundamentalists. Other than there's problems, but they have a stronger claim because the Mormon fundamentalists they're fracturing now, and different groups are splitting off, and it just felt like they were dying. It felt like, in a way, there wasn't a cohesiveness with the fundamentalists, and yet the Mormon Church was continuing on. They had good programs for the youth. They had temples being built and things. It just felt like, well, maybe this is what the truth is and the other isn't. So I started to entertain that idea. I did entertain polygamy from my wife and I talked about it. It's like, maybe this will be in the future. This was prior to my studying. When I was first married, we were talking about that, thinking, well, maybe this is what's in our future. But then as I started having problems with some of the fundamentalist teachings, I moved away. And by the time I had really started to look to the church, I had given up the idea of polygamy. I was like, oh, no, that's not, I'm not going to go there. I don't think that's the right thing to do. And my wife, all the time, this has been a horrible, horrible issue for her, is polygamy. She had some terrible, terrible experiences as a young girl, seeing the things that went on in polygamy, and I myself saw some horrible things that went down in polygamy just growing up. So I saw there was a real negative side to it. But in her experience, it was just terrible. But it was also her heritage, is what she knew as well as what I knew. And so there came a point in time when, in just studying it out and just figuring, I got to do something because my kids are going to be 8. My oldest is going to be 8 before long. I got to figure this out. And so I kind of just made the determination. I think that the best thing to do would be to go to the mainstream Mormon Church. And so I had done all the study. My wife knows that I was deep studying all this kind of stuff, but she didn't know where it was going to lead. And so we had a conversation. We sat down and talked, and I said, I've been really, all the study I've been doing, I've been thinking that perhaps maybe we should look at joining the Mormon Church. And I thought, well, we'll see how this goes, because that's, that was a step down from what we used to believe. Like I explained before, it was like the milquetoast version. It's watered down Mormonism. And I just see what she says with that. And she's like, I've been thinking the same thing. And I'm like, oh, well, this is going to be easier than I thought. So we started to talk about it. And then over time, we just thought, let's do this. I think this is the right thing to do. And from her perspective, what she told me later was, I was like, yes, because the Mormon Church wasn't practicing polygamy yet by this time, and that would just seal the deal. He's never going to get this idea of polygamy. Now it's over. And so she was very much on board with that, thinking this is a good idea. And so we both decided, let's do that. Let's join the Mormon Church. I had some friends that allowed us to come to their house, and their bishop was a really friendly to them when they came out of fundamentalist and joined the Mormon Church. And so they said, why don't you come to his house, and we'll have the missionaries come over there. And so I'm like, okay. And so we went over there, and he was a bishop in a ward, and so we sit down there, and then the missionaries come in, and the first thing they said to me, now, I've been trained and schooled in Mormonism, and the deepest part of Mormonism since I was this big, and I've been catechized on some of the heavy Mormon doctrine. So anyway, I sit in there, and these Mormon missionaries say, so what do you think God is? Is he like a tree to you, or the rocks? And I just looked at him like, I looked at the bishop, and I'm like, who are these guys? What is this all about? I don't have time for this. And so he's like, tells them, look, we can kind of move along. He's familiar with all this kind of stuff. And so, because they had and you would probably know this as you deal with Mormon missionaries, everything is very systematic, and they have a way, and they almost have a way of talking, and then this, then this, then this, like they've been schooled and trained exactly how to lay out what they're going to say to people, and it's like they've memorized a script of some kind. Well, that's what this was like a memorized script. And I was like, whoa, this is just, I didn't like it at all. And so they have 6 discussions that they're supposed to go to, and it's supposed to be 6 separate days, they're visits. So they're supposed to come over and give you discussion number 1, and then discussion 2, and on till, by the 6th visit, you're done with them, and now they challenge you for baptism. So that's kind of the plan. And so I'm just like, just move along here. Let's just go through this. And he's like, looking at, okay. And so they do discussion 2, and I move along that, discussion 3. And at each one, they talk about different Mormon concepts. And I remember one was like, what do you feel about tithing, And so I'm like, well, yeah, I believe that, because it was no different. And they were just like, awesome, they're just thinking they have a golden contact, this is great, and they get down to the end, and they're like, well, so do you want to be baptized then? And I'm like, I thought that's why we were here. I thought this is what this whole little ritual was all about, so I could get baptized. It was like, I'm just kind of going through the motions here of, isn't that why we're here? And he's like, yeah, that's why we're here. Let's set it up, and so he turns to his companion and he says, let's go, you go call president and just see when we can have it. He's, how about next Saturday? And I'm like, sure, next Saturday. And so he gets on the phone, is talking to his mission president, and he comes back in and he's like, so we got a little problem. It's not going to be next Saturday. He says, I'm talking with President, and anybody that's been a rapist, a murderer, or a polygamist has to go see one of the 12 and get approval. And I didn't hear anything more than murder and rapist and polygamist. And I'm like, come again? What'd you say? And then he kind of like a little bit, anybody that, and he kind of repeated it, but it wasn't quite as, he kind of realized that I was bothered. And I'm like, you're putting me in the category of murderers and rapists. Is that what you're telling me? And he's like, no. I said, well, I'm not even a polygamist. Why do I have to do this? And then the bishop steps in and he's like, oh, well, he says, Alan, look, let me help you with this a little bit. He said, they have this policy. If that was where you come from, then you need to go see one of them so they can kind of get their stamp of approval. He said, just look at it like this. He said, the average Mormon would just die to have the opportunity to go sit in the office with one of the 12 apostles, and you guys get that. I just looked at him like, I don't want that. I didn't care. I didn't see them like they saw them. I saw the church as like, well, it's probably the best place, but I didn't see them as like almost gods like they did. They were like almost, that level of importance was so high. So it just didn't mean that much to me, and I just said, fine, okay, whatever. If that's what we do, I guess I made the decision. That's what I'm going to do. So we'll go forward with it. And so we ended that and set up the appointment. And ironically, it was Russell M. Nielsen who was he was one of the 12 apostles at the time, and he was the one that was designated to handle those that were coming from Mormon fundamentalist backgrounds and wanting to join the church, because apparently there was quite a few over the years that were coming into the church with all the fractions that were going on in some of these fundamentalist groups. So we go up to his office, meet with him, sit down in his office, and beautiful, big, gigantic desk. I mean, this is like a big executive desk, and he's sitting behind there, and he kind of goes through the pleasantries of, how are you doing? Where are you from? Well, a little bit about your life. And then as he begins to ask some more questions, and he goes, so how do you feel about, and he's probing things like, the Book of Mormon, and how do you feel about, do you have a testimony of Jesus and Joseph Smith? And then he goes, and then can you testify that Ezra Taft Benson is a prophet, seer, and revelator? He was the president of the church at the time. And that just, for some reason, I heard that, and it was just like, well, like he wanted me to testify, and I just felt like, well, I don't know. God hasn't told me that he was like a prophet, seer, and revelator. That's what he was kind of like asking me. And see, in the Mormons would say that so casually that they would just say, oh yeah, he's a prophet, seer, and revelator, and they would have no problem with it. But to me, I was taking it very serious and literal, thinking, well, no, God hasn't really told me that. And so I told him that. I said, well, I think, and this is kind of how I was looking at it. I think he's the president of the church and has the authority, all the authority to do all these kinds of things, but I haven't had that revealed to me that he's prophet, seer, and revelator. And that just stopped him right in his tracks. And he kind of just got a little bit of, looked at me like, and then I remember he opened his top drawer, pulled out this piece of paper, took out a pencil, and he drew this big square, and they drew like 4 little squares like in the corner, like to indicate columns. And he's like, and then he writes, Book of Mormon, Joseph Smith, Jesus Christ, and current prophet, on each one of these columns. And he said, these columns that I've drawn here on this paper, he said, they represent your testimony. And he says, if you're weak in any one of these columns, the building isn't going to stand. And he says, so you can't testify that Ezra Taft Benson is a prophet, seer, and revelator. So your column here isn't going to stand. I think it's too weak. So he says, my recommendation is you don't join the church. And I went, well, I was completely taken off guard. I said, well, I don't think you understand what I was trying to say. I said, what I was trying to say was I think he has the keys and the authority, and I accept all that. God just hasn't revealed that to me. He says, nevertheless, that's my decision. And so my recommendation is that you wait or don't join. I can't remember the exact terminology they use. And I was just like, okay. And I just got up and we left, and I was very upset. I went back to that bishop's house, and I said, they won't let me in. And he's like, what? This is the strangest thing. This was the strangest thing. This is when I first really began to see some things in Mormon culture, of the mainstream Mormon culture. I guess there was the same kind of things in the fundamentalist Mormonism, but it really kind of shocked me, because I thought that he should have been able to discern. So, well, here's this young guy, he's an apostle in the faith. Wouldn't he be able to tell if I was just not sincere? And I thought, I'm sincere. But what bothered me really a lot was when I went and talked to this bishop, and I said, they won't let me in. And he goes, wow, I wonder what Elder Nielsen saw. I couldn't understand. It's like, hey, how come you're not on my side? That's kind of what I didn't say that to him, but I felt like, why aren't you on my side? I wanted to go join the church, and they wouldn't let me. And he was on Nelson's side, saying, I wonder what Nelson saw that we can't see. And I was just like, fine. I just kind of left. I was upset, and I didn't understand what was going on. And at this particular time, we were right in the middle. We had to move where we were living, and so we moved into another neighborhood and got settled into another neighborhood. So a couple of weeks had passed. So I met with as we moved in this new neighborhood, the bishop and that came over, and so I told him the story. And guess what he said? The exact same thing, and it just really surprised me. He goes, he's acting really shocked, and he's like, wow, I wonder what Elder Nielsen was seeing, or what he, kind of like, obviously, their prophet had to, or their apostle had to be right, and I had to be wrong. And I'm like, how come no one's on my side? I don't understand this. So I was really, really bothered, and I ended up talking to a Mormon guy that I'd met, and he basically told me, he says, look, just be patient. Maybe the Lord is trying to teach you something, kind of that little thing, instead of, kind of calming my feelings of going against the brethren, He says, just go into that ward where you're living now, and just kind of get involved as much as you can, and then I'm sure the Lord will, in His time, work things out. And so I thought, well, and I made this decision. That's what we plan on doing. So I guess we'll do that. So we started going to the ward as not a member, but yet just attending, and just kind of observing and watching. And about 7 or 8, maybe even closer to 9 months went by, and I would be meeting with the bishop and the stake president, and it was always that same thing, almost like there was something that the Lord wanted me to see, so I was just patiently waiting for whatever it is, and just not sure what was going to happen. And so then I get a call from the Utah Salt Lake City mission, and they had got a new mission president. And this mission president, he called me and said, hey, Brother Nielsen, this is so-and-so from the Utah Salt Lake City mission. He says, I understand that you've been trying to get baptized. And I said, yeah, but they won't let me, And, well, let me see what I can do for you. He was a real gregarious type of personality, and just really super friendly. He says, why don't you come to my office at this particular time, and we'll talk. And so, okay. And so I went to his office, and he sat down, and it was the typical, oh, you're such a wonderful family, you need to be in this church, and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, well, I tried. And so he's like, I think I can help you out here. I got some connections. We'll figure it out. We'll work this out. I'm like, okay. And so about 2 weeks later, I get a call, and he's like, got an appointment for you with Elder Nielsen again. And I'm like, okay. All righty, we'll see how this goes. And so I went up there again. I wasn't sure exactly what would happen. I wasn't going to make the same mistake, but at the same time, I didn't know what he was going to ask me, so I didn't know if I would make another mistake. And so he asked me a few other questions, and he doesn't even bring up that first question. But then whatever I said, I answered right, I guess. It sounded good enough to him. And he's like, let me tell you something. He said, when you came the first time, he says, you might not know this, he said, but there's been quite a few people coming from and he named this particular group, and I think it was the All Red group, but there was a few polygamist groups where they would send some of their members, young members, into the mainstream Mormon Church, have them go be baptized, and then they would come out, or they'd go to the Mormon temple and get their endowments, and then they would come out and go back to the fundamentalist group, sometimes bringing with them some members. And I guess that was what was going on, and he kind of thought I was Exhibit A for that, you know. And he says, so I thought that's what you were, but I can see now, you know, if you spent 9 months in the church in your ward, and so he said, well, you know, and then he said, will you forgive me? And, you know, and I'm like, yeah, sure. and so they go ahead and said, I'm cleared to be baptized, I guess. So then we got baptized into the Mormon Church, and it had been almost a year since we had first applied, and then just tried to be a good Mormon. But the whole time, in the back of my mind was my history and the study that I had, and just not a complete settledness that all was well and it was like this is the way it's supposed to be. It's like something was still not quite right. But I still made the decision that this is the best place to raise my family, and I did believe it was God's true church, so to speak. So I thought, well, this is what this was my rationalization. It was kind of like, well, when I was born onto the scene, it was long after the manifesto, it was long after all these changes from early Mormonism happened to the modern Mormonism. So I wasn't responsible for it, so God's got to know, and He knows what's going on, and so I'll just trust in Him and just go to the main church because it's better than all these fundamentalist groups. And so that's what I decided to do, and we began to raise our family as Mormons, and I tried to be a good Mormon, tried to go in with diligence at first, and it was a little awkward because I would bring up some things, I had to do it kind of carefully, but I would ask some questions. I was like, so how do we look at this, kind of just trying to probing a little bit, and it was something they just didn't like. Most of the people didn't like me talking about some of those subjects, they kind of thought it was, they kind of gave the impression of like, well, this is going to hurt your testimony. You better kind of like be careful. And I'm like, well, I was kind of like, but where do we stand on that? That's kind of what I was trying to get. And no one really wanted to take a stand to say, this is what this is where this, blacks in the priesthood, this happened here, this was wrong here, Brigham Young wasn't wrong here. No one would say that kind of stuff. They would just kind of dance around it and never leave me with anything solid. I would just kind of go, well. And then I had to just figure it out myself, what I thought was going on. Because what I wanted to know was, what do we do with Brigham Young? That was my biggest thing. Because I was raised on that kind of stuff, and I heard what he said. Not personally, but I mean, I read, and it was heard over the pulpit from where I came, him reading what Brigham Young said about this. So I'm like, yeah, well, what do we do with that? I'm just curious, how do we handle that? And they would it was always that, well, we weren't there, and we don't know all what's going on, and so I just never got clear answers. So I just quit asking. I quit going that. So blacks in the priesthood was one. Polygamy wasn't really, I just kind of let that one go. That was something I already kind of didn't want to even bring up because that caused me so much consternation trying to figure out what was going on. I knew that they wouldn't even begin to have even an answer, and I didn't really want to go down that road anyway, so I just kind of left that one. But anyway, I tried to be the best Mormon I could be, and And for the first few years, I just tried to adapt and do what I could. But then after a while, I just started feeling like no one really cares about this stuff. And you just kind of, almost like you don't even realize it, but you just become one of them, and you just start kind of not caring yourself and just and it becomes kind of a ritual. You just go to church, send your kids to the classes and do your thing and get done with church and go home and then just live your life. And I just kind of fell into it, kind of a little bit of a Mormon complacency kind of thing, and my life wasn't really rich in the spiritual side of things. I mean, there are times, little moments, and times it was better than others, but for the most part, it wasn't that great. And so what I started to do over time is I started losing interest in really trying to understand more doctrines and trying to grow in my understanding. I just kind of let it go. And I even lost interest in trying to be a good Mormon. I just started being more a little bit like, no, I didn't care, as much. I mean, I still did. I still believed it, but I just kind of didn't put as much energy into it. And then as the years went by, it just wasn't working out well. I was just feeling problems with the church and things that I didn't like. And I would dismiss most of it and just kind of go, well, it's God's in charge of that. It's not me, and just kind of put it out of my mind. But then I just started reminiscing back on my life and feeling like, I really got robbed. And I started feeling that feeling like I got robbed because my dad took me out of school when I was in 8th grade, sent me into the workforce. And then, I started a business when I was in my 20s. And started a business, and I did pretty well with it, but it wasn't what I wanted to do, and I felt like, I guess what you would call is I was having a midlife crisis, you could say, but I started to feel like I never got to choose the path that I wanted to go down. It was just thrust on me, and so I started to, I wanted to figure out how I could pursue what I was interested in. And so I thought the quickest road to that was to get rich, get lots of money. Not because I loved money so much, but I loved the fact that if I had money, then I could go pursue whatever I wanted to do. And so I thought that's what I'll do, is I'll figure out how to make a lot of money. So then I don't have to work all the time. Then I can start doing what I like to do, which is I like to develop the mind, and I wanted to read and study and all through the years I self-taught myself. That's what I would do in my spare time, read things, and I did a lot of Mormon stuff, read a lot of Mormon theologies and biographies and different things like that, and then just mainly even worldly ideas, things just about the world, and trying to understand things in life, and just tried to get kind of an education on my own, I guess you could say. But I was always interested in those kinds of things. And so I thought, well, if I can get enough money, then I can pursue whatever interest that I have, and then all will be well. And so I started going down that road and did that for a few years and got involved in real estate things and, made a lot of money, but then things started to go south. And as I was immersing myself into the money thing, it also has a way of just grabbing hold of you and just absorbing you with its own. It's like it starts to eat you alive, and all you're so consumed with, how do I make it? What do I do? And it just do whatever you have to do to get there, and it becomes very, very. It's just all consuming. And so I was thinking less and less about Mormonism and my faith and the things of that, and more about making money. And but in 2007 and 2008, I had some really serious reverses that pretty much. I look back now and I can see that God was doing something. At the time, I didn't understand because I a lot of bad things happened. And it was, I got caught in all the real estate downturns, and I had some investments in Ohio that I got lots of money, was cheated out of lots of money and different deals that I was trying to do. It was just, to go into the details is not my point of even talking about it, but it was just a huge loss. And I had loans on homes and things being built and stuff going down. I was, because I was trying to build this empire. And it just started to all just crumble to pieces, just one by one, and it almost felt deliberate. Even though there was a real estate downturn in like 2008, and I got caught in that, but it was just very serious. I was feeling something's bad. This is not going good at all. And so I just lost everything, almost. And in 2009, I thought I was going to lose the house. And we had our youngest kids were still in high school, and I was like, I don't really want to do this. I would uproot them, and it was just very stressful time. And some of the strangest things happened during this time, because I lost all those real estate things that just crumbled down, and I was in a really bad place. And I had this mindset that I had developed way back when I was a young person, that I can pick myself up by my own bootstraps. I'm a rugged individualist type of thing. I grew up in a polygamous home, and I went to only 8th grade, and then I rose up out of the ashes of that and made something of myself, and started a business, and it was somewhat successful, and then got into real estate, and for a while it was successful. And so I can do this. I'm a self-made man, and I very much valued my autonomy as a person of who I was and what I could do. And so I said, I'll just do it again. And this is what was really surprising, is everything I tried just fell apart. Everything after the real estate, I thought, I'll pick myself up. I've read stories of people that have done this. Some of the wealthiest people have lost it all and then built their wealth up even bigger than the last time. And I thought, I'll do the same thing. And it just wouldn't work. Everything I touched, it seems like everything that I touched just died and died and died. And I was at that point really frustrated for a time. And my view of God was like, God, why are you, I just want to make enough money to take care of my family. Why are you shutting all the doors? Because I started thinking he was doing it, because why else is this happening? I couldn't figure it out. And so I started getting a little angry and upset at God. At the very bottom, I was just pretty much wiped out, and I had tried everything that I could think of. And then when I thought I was going to lose this house, kind of a series of events happened that just allowed me to save the house. And it was just so, the likelihood of them lining up like they did was just really quite unreal. And I thought, wow, God did that, And I remember the feeling that came over me was just one of immense gratitude. That's like, that was God, and it's really softened my heart. And I started to realize, oh, that was God that did that. And so I was able to save the house. And then I still continued to try to figure out how to pull myself up and get back on my feet. And it was still a struggle for a little bit of time. And then in 2011, when I was once again, I was at my wit's end and thinking, I don't know why I can't get something started. It's just not working. But then something came up, and I was able to get a really good job, and it just came out of nowhere again. And I was just like, I remember the day when I got that job, and I was just like, wow. I remember telling my wife, it's like, I think God did this. I have no other explanation for it. So those two experiences was a softening for me. And then, so now I had the financial pressure was off, and we had saved our house, and I hadn't had a good job now, and Diane had been working for the hospital, working at nights, and now the kids were mostly gone. We had some of the The youngest one were in high school, but then they had their own life and they were gone a lot. And so on the nights when my wife would go to work, when I got home, I just thought, you know what? I'm going to spend a little bit of time, because throughout our marriage, the idea of polygamy was always a really rough spot for us, and it was hard for her, and she would always ask me questions of, is this okay? Let's talk about the polygamy. And I'm like, oh, here comes the polygamy talk, you know, because I did never have answers, and it's one of the hardest things as a Mormon to try and justify the polygamy question, you know, especially because, well, we're not living it now, but was it right? You know, it was just a very difficult question to answer. And so she would probe that one and say, well, okay, are we going to live it in the next life? And I'm like, oh, man, I don't know. And she says, well, what do you think? And I'm like, well, the scriptures, you know, meaning the Mormon scriptures, well, they say that it's, you know, it's an eternal law. So I guess maybe, you know. And I said, but don't worry about it. You know, it's like I'm not gonna take another wife. The church doesn't practice polygamy. We're not doing it. Don't worry about it. And she says, well, that's easy for you to say because you get to multiply, but I have to divide. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's an interesting thought, you know. So anyway, it was quite often that these conversations came up. It wasn't once in a while. It always turned into, I don't know, go ask God because He's the one that, you know, this is where it came from. And it's a terrible thing to try and defend. And so anyway, I thought to myself, okay, now I don't have all these other problems to deal with. I'm going to look into this. I'm going to look into the genesis of polygamy and find out some good answers so that when she asks again, I can say, well, because of this and this and this, and I'll at least have something to say, you know. And so this was in March of 2012. And I remember that was the beginning of the end of Mormonism for me, because I started, now we have the internet, long had it, and everything is so available to research and find. And so I started going down there and looking into all this stuff in polygamy, and I'm finding a lot of stuff. Now, I grew up believing Joseph Smith was a polygamist. I knew it. I'd been taught it since I was a little kid, but I didn't know all the details, all the ugly details. No one had ever taught us that. That wasn't something that they talked about. And now I'm reading these accounts and these stories of polygamy that Joseph Smith was involved in that is horrific. And I was just like, whoa. This has got to be the typical thing that most Mormons say is this is anti-Mormon stuff. It's got to be anti-Mormon, you know. And so somebody doesn't like us, and they're trying to hurt us, even though I'm not even really that super involved. I still go to church. I'm still part, but you still have that. It's us, you know. And so I'm looking at the references. Where do they find this material? And this is stuff that's coming from inside of the church, and it's diaries from the people that it happened to, or their grandma, or their mother, or whatever. It's literally diaries of events that happened to these people, and it's stuff that even the church is acknowledging. It's like these are the diaries of these people, and I'm just like, well, something's wrong. This is not right. How can these things be? How can Joseph Smith have done these things? This is wrong. And that was a very difficult thing for me to see. It had the feeling of I remember that night, it just felt like somebody had just taken my breath away. Like, you know, that feeling you get when you have a bad fall and you can't take in air. That's what it felt. I was just like, wow, it's like spent my whole life believing this, and it's now this Joseph Smith did this. I didn't know how to process these kinds of behaviors with this man that was held in such high regard. And so over time, I just put it aside for a bit, you know, and I remember the next day, my wife usually calls me when she gets up from after sleeping for the night because she's working the night shift, just kind of see how things are. And she called me, and I was talking with her, and she's like, "What's the matter?" And I'm like, I just found out some things that are just really troubling, And then she's like, what? And I'm like, well, it just has to do with the church and polygamy and Joseph Smith, and and she's just like, it immediately panicked, and she's telling me, well, don't just look at one side, you got to look at all sides. I'm like, yeah, I know. But, and then she was worried about it. She says, just be careful, because she knows that, if I'm going to dig stuff up, I'm going to dig into it, and so, so I set it aside for a little bit, and it's like, there's some trepidation now, and it's like, now another night comes, and I'm like, should I look into this more? And I just had to. And so I started looking into it more, and it's just like confirming things of these. And it was all, I was focusing on this polygamy because it was such a shock to me. And so then I don't look at anything else, even though I can see some of the, I'm trying to unearth some of the Mormon problems, and they're just like coming at all angles of different things on the internet, and I'm just tackling this polygamy thing. And so then after a while, I'm trying to make sense of it. And so I finally come to the determination in my mind that, okay, Joseph Smith was wrong. David did wrong, Moses did some wrong. I mean, all prophets have always done wrong, so he did wrong with polygamy. Maybe that's why he died in Carthage jail, because polygamy was wrong, and God took him out. Allowed him to be taken out. So maybe that's how this goes down. Even though that's a very slippery slope, but I didn't realize it at the time. It was my only way to rationalize what was going on. And so that's where I maintained that for about a month. And as I'm slowly starting to peek at a few more things, I come across this lady, and she had left the church, and she made this comment, and she said, I struggled and struggled to make sense of everything until I finally came to the determination that Joseph Smith was a false prophet. And as soon as I entertained that, she said, it all made sense. And I remember just going, no, she's wrong. Can't be. But I thought about that, and I thought about what she said many, many times. And so I started to look at other things. And I started looking, and I discovered, all the deep issues regarding the Masonic stuff. And I began to research all that, and it was just like, okay, that's not good. And then I started to see some more things about the Kinderhook plates and the Greek Psalter and all these kinds of things that he was involved with that were proven false or not accurate at all. And it's just like, this is not going well at all. And then there was the Book of Abraham, and I took that one on, and it was just like, that was just so big. It was just like, everything was just stacked against him, and I remembered that lady, what she had said, and I thought, maybe he is a false prophet. I couldn't say it out loud. It was really strange. I couldn't say it out loud because that was my life for most of my entire life, was believing he was a prophet of God. And in Mormonism, it's different. They view him in a very high, he's a pivotal person. So, but anyway, I finally thought that maybe he's a prophet, maybe he's a false prophet. And I entertained that. And I thought, if he's a false prophet, that would make sense. Why this. And it was just like she said, it was like a puzzle piece that just went, now it all makes sense and it all fit together. He's a false prophet. And if he's a false prophet, it makes perfect sense. And so I started going, wow, have I been deceived this whole time? It was hard, but then now what do I do? I was like, what do I do? And so I became very, very cynical. And I didn't want to be part of the church. But I was afraid and nervous that I would, if I left, my options were atheism, New Age. I didn't know what else there was. And I don't know why I hadn't, at that particular time, I didn't think of Christianity, but I was just thinking, I don't know what to do. But I knew I couldn't be an atheist, because it's like, no, there's a God. I just can't. And I've had family members that got involved in the New Age, and it's like, no, I can't go there. And so I became very much, I was just really deeply disturbed and cynical. And I didn't want to be in church. I was looking for a way out. And I would go to the wards on Sunday, and I would literally sit in the sacrament meetings and feel like I couldn't breathe again. I would tell my wife I'd be sitting down with my head in my hands, and I'd say, I gotta get out. I can't breathe. And she says, what do you mean you can't breathe? I said, I feel I'm suffocating. I got to get out of here. I can't leave. I leave. And she's like, okay. And so I'd get up and go, and then I would come and pick her up after the end of service. And this went on for quite a while. And I remember even after, like I told you, I could see that it was obvious that this was false. But I would literally wake up sometimes in the middle of the night with what I call the night sweats, where I just wake up in dead fear and just like, what have I done? What's going on? It's like throwing everything away. It didn't make any sense, but it was a real emotion that would happen, and I would just wake up and sit up in bed and just feel this overwhelming like dread, and I would get up. And I would go into my little study there, pull out all my documentations, and as I would read this, yeah, that's right, yeah, and it would just like verify that what I had done is correct, and there's a reason why. Then I'd go back to bed. But that happened for quite a while. Would wake up these frights and just feel like, whoa, what have I done? And so there's some doubts, even though. Intellectually, I understood that Mormonism was false. But it's like the heart hadn't quite caught up. And so it would still get trapped sometimes in those things. And sometimes you have to almost like unthread some of Mormonism out very delicately. And have you ever tried to unthread something that breaks off? Oh, and then you got to pull that piece out. And you can't just pull the thread out and it just comes all out. You have to just delicately pull each little piece out. That's kind of how it was, slowly just taking it apart and pulling it out one by one until it's like, okay, now I've solved that. Now that's not there. And one particular time when I was doing some study, I just stumbled on some former Mormons that had become Christians, and they were giving their story. And I was like, whoa. I watched the whole thing. This was some of the Adams Roads, some of those guys, Micah Wilder, and a few of the others that were on their videos that they were showing. And I was just blown away by that. And I thought to myself, I can be a Christian. That's what I'll do. That's door number 3. I'll be a Christian. That's my answer. And so I thought that's what we can do. And so, and in the meantime, my wife was behind me a little bit. I had introduced her to the idea of polygamy, and we had talked about that. And she, what do we think? We're with Joseph Smith. How does this all figure out? And we kind of both came to the determination that it was wrong. But she didn't know some of the other stuff that I had found out about Mormonism. And so then I started to just kind of throw some stuff out, and it was just like, she was like swallowing like a fire hose, all the stuff that I was telling her. And it was very hard on her to hear all this kinds of stuff. But then after I'd watched this video, I scheduled a little vacation trip for us, and we went and we were going down to California. We were driving up the coast in the Big Sur coast area, and then it was just a beautiful drive. So I thought, we'll just talk about this thing, and we'll kind of hammer it all out, what we're going to do. And I told her a little bit about, I can't be part of the church anymore at all. I think you should leave too, but I'm going to leave. But let me tell you why I think you should leave. And I said, we can become Christians. And she's like, hippies? And it just was ironic that we were driving down the Big Sur coast where all the hippies always hang out, and they used to. But I said, no, not hippies. I said, they're, and then I told her about the videos that I watch, and we had this long chat and conversation about everything, and she was just like, what in the world is happening to my life? It's just being turned upside down. I don't know what's going on. But she said she would watch these, and so after we got back, she started watching some of the videos, and so she started to see some of the things, and she agreed that, okay, but I don't know I don't know where to start. And so, I pointed her to these videos, says, watch these videos. I think you'll find them very interesting. And she did, and it brought her to tears. And she was just, and so I'm like, yes, she's on board. This is a good thing, And so, but I was convinced at this particular time, that's what we're going to do. I have a path to go down. I had no idea what it was going to look like. Zero experience as being in. I'd never been to a Christian church. I'd never talked to a Christian. I'd listened to those pastors on the radio. That was the extent of my experience with a Christian, period. But I knew these guys had something. They left the Mormon Church, and I thought, that's what I want to do. And so, and my motivation at that time was, I knew they had good values. They believed in Jesus and God, and thought, there you go. I can do that. I can be a Christian. So then for the next month, I had a path, and so I was determined I was just going to uncover everything that I could about Mormons, because I wanted to just really, make sure that I didn't do things hastily, or whatever. So I spent a solid month of just uncovering everything, and now nothing was held back. I looked at every little nook and cranny of Mormonism, literally spent hours and hours and hours just. And I was shocked at all the things I kept learning and finding out about what was going on, the problems, problem after problem after problem, just a plethora of problems. And so now and you get more and more convinced that this is wrong. It doesn't take away from the shock factor of it all. That's almost like in the back of your mind, it doesn't even settle in yet, because there's a preponderance of evidence against the Mormon faith, so much so that you can't even think of the emotional and the stuff that affects you in that way until later. So anyway, I'm just so convinced, okay, this is what I got to do. I'm done with Mormonism, and we quit going to the Mormon Church. I told I'm not paying no more money to the Mormon Church. I'm done. And she quits too. But then I say, I got to start figuring things out. So what do you do? And so I started watching some other videos, and they're talking about, reading the Bible, and Micah talks about how he read the Bible as like a child, and it changed his world and stuff like that. So I thought, okay, well and I have a quad, but I didn't want that one. It's got the other stuff in there. The stuff that I had seen was false. And I'm like, so I don't want to take that one. So I went down and I went on Amazon and just bought a King James. I didn't know there was all these other translations. So I just bought a King James Bible that just was King James Bible, and it had nothing to do with the Mormon Church. It didn't have, because the Mormon Church uses the King James translation in their Bible, but then they always have their subheadings. They write their little subheadings of what's in the particular chapter and whatnot, And then at the bottom, there's all these footnotes. It'll say, see Alma, see, Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants, Yeah, I didn't want any of that. And so I just bought just a King James Bible. And then everybody always recommended, well, you should just start with the New Testament. So, okay, that's what I'll do. And so I started to read the New Testament. And I would like to tell the story that, man, that just changed my life just right there, but it was more of a process. I had found another book by another former Mormon that became a Christian, and so I kind of read the Bible as I read that book, and that really helped me, and it really got me on the right footing, because he understood some of maybe the challenges that coming from Mormonism I would face, or people would face that read his book. And so he started out with just, let's examine the Bible And we'll start with the New Testament. Is it something reliable? As a Mormon, I had never, ever even peeked into that kind of stuff. They never even it never even got brought to anybody's attention in my world. And I would say the large majority of most Mormons, maybe some of the scholars at BYU had some insight into that, but I just had no idea. And so I'm reading his book, and he's talking all about all the manuscript evidence for the New Testament. And he's saying, go look up. He said, if you really want to do a little more, get a little more detail, go look up John Ryland's manuscript. And so I'm writing this down, and I'm doing all that. I'm looking up, and I'm blown away, absolutely blown away by the evidence. I had no idea there was that many copies and partial copies and other language. It was something I just had never heard, and it was so overwhelming. I was like, wow, that was like good news to me, because finally there's some evidence that has substance. And so I was like, whoa. And then he said, then the next chapter is, now we get to look at the Old Testament. And then he goes back and he shows you, with the Dead Sea Scrolls. And I had heard about the Dead Sea Scrolls, but Mormons didn't talk about them that much because they didn't serve them very well. It was kind of not very helpful, actually. Some BYU scholars would talk about them a little bit, Hugh Nibley and whatnot, but it wasn't, I didn't really know much about them. So then I'm reading about all the manuscripts there, the old relics that they found, and it's just like, wow. And then he's telling the story of how it just wipes out like 1,000 years of manuscript history, and it's the same, relatively speaking. And I was just blown away by that. I'm like, wow, this. And so now I've got this reverence for the Bible, just out of that aspect, not because I know it's God's word yet, but it's like, whoa, even as a manuscript, people should pay attention to this. That's what I thought. This has got value. And so now I'm just totally set up to start reading it and believing it because of being set up like that and seeing those kinds of things. And now I'm starting to read in there, and I'm reading stuff, and I'm like, whoa. It's just like, this wasn't, how come I didn't know this was here? It's just blowing my mind, some of the things I'm reading in the New Testament, Paul's letters, just mind-blowing to me. I was just like, and this book that I was reading, he's quoting these passages, and I'm like, that's not in the Bible. And so I go and read the Bible, pull it up, and I'm like, whoa, it's there. And so this is going on, and I'm reading all this type of stuff, and at this particular time, I had done studying the Mormon stuff, and I was just really trying to immerse myself into this Christianity, and I'm discovering all these kinds of things that I didn't know existed. One, that the Bible had some reliability, and then that what was in there. I was working, and my schedule at this particular time, I had to do some night shift work, and it was a time when I actually had a fair amount of time where I didn't have nothing to do except for kind of wait around, and so I used that time to read and study some of these things. And I remember this was in July of 2015, early July, and I remember just really, as I've been reading that, realizing that, that Jesus is God, and it was something that just blew my mind, because as a Mormon, even though they'll say, yeah, he became a God or whatever, but I realized that Jesus was God, and it was just so overwhelming to me, and I was just like, wow, this is, and I was just compelled in my mind. I need to talk to God, Jesus. I need to. And so it was the middle of the night. It's probably like 2:00 in the morning. It was a warm night. I just got out there, and it was just said this really awkward prayer, but it was just like, I didn't know you were God. It was just this it was so hard I just felt like I've missed out. You're God. And I gave this really strange kind of half Mormon, half I don't know what prayer, but it was just like I've just got so much to learn, you know. But then I also was reading and realizing that when coming through grace and understanding, this is like something was like, whoa, how is this? This sounded almost like it was cheap. I just believe and that's it, you know. I wasn't quite understanding, but it's like this is just. I was struggling with it, and I thought that just doesn't sound like it could be right. And as I pondered on it, the more I thought about it, I started realizing what it entailed and what it meant to follow Christ. And it just really hit me that night. What it means is you've got to, you know, as I was reading the scriptures, you got to die to yourself. And then it's just like, oh, okay. You know, this was foreign to me from my Mormon teachings. You got to die to yourself. You no longer, you don't live for you. You basically belong to Christ. And that's what it means. And I remembered reading in the Gospels where Jesus says that, you know, you should count the cost before you begin the project, so to speak. And I thought to myself, I got to decide, is this what I want? Because autonomy is what I valued, having come from a very difficult childhood life and felt like it was almost like me against the world so many times. And I valued the fact that I control my destiny, so to speak, or at least I thought I did. But that was my concept, was I controlled my destiny, I've made myself this way, and now I've got to give this up. And that was the thoughts that I was thinking, and then I remember thinking, okay, if I don't, then I go back to this confusion, and it's up to me. And so I just made the decision that night there. It's like, okay, I'll do it. I'll be Christ. I'll be a Christian, and I'll live for Christ. That's what I'll do. And I just eagerly accepted it. Made that decision, but I made the conscious choice that I was going to do that. And coupled with the reading of the Bible for the first time as it really was, just opened up my mind, totally opened up my mind, and I was just like blown away by everything I was reading. I couldn't get enough of it. I would just read, and just every single ounce of time I had, I wanted to learn more what this said, and then I would listen to I started listening to different pastors and different people and on the radios or podcasts or things, and just trying to absorb as much as I could, because it's like, man, this has all been here and I didn't know it. But that's what began my journey, and that, I guess, if I could pinpoint a night, I guess it was the night when I prayed to Jesus and actually said, I'll be a Christian, I will follow you, I'll give my life to you. That's probably the pivotal point when I truly realized this is a different life for me. It's not the same. It's like I'm never going back. And I had that awareness that night. I'm never going back. I'm not the same person ever again after this. And my life is going to change. And I knew it. And it really did change. I didn't change in a way of like extreme dramatic as far as my day-to-day activities. But everything that I did was just so I had different desires. It just changed completely. My desires were wanting to know the truth and wanted to know the Lord. And then I had a passion to I wanted to know the truth. I don't care what it is. I don't care if I don't like it. I want to know what is the truth. That became the journey that I started on. And as I began to read the Bible, my first experiences, just having come from Mormonism and some of the ways that the abuses of religion and whatnot, I didn't want the church. I'm like, no, I'll just be one of those lone Christians, it'll be me and the Bible and God. That's what I'll do. That was kind of my thoughts when I was thinking at first. It didn't last for very long, but that was the first thought because I can't take a church. I just don't want to do this. Not what I want. But as I began to read the Bible, and not only just reading the Bible, I started to want to find other people, other believers. I know they're out here. I got to just find them, and I started to want that. And so I remember telling my wife, I think we need to start looking at a church. And she just got that terrified look, and I said, because while I was working that night shift, I couldn't attend Sundays for quite a while. But then I had this time coming up where I had a whole month of every Sunday I was able to attend and go to a church. And so I said, this month in August. This is August. I can go to churches, so I'm gonna go look for churches. Part of the, in the process, I had, in my uncovering some of the things, I had known about Sandra Tanner when I was a Mormon, and she was always like the arch enemy of Mormonism. Oh, Sandra Tanner, she's that, that lady that lies, and, just kind of what I thought. So I thought, I probably need to go see her, and so I went down to her bookstore, and she was there, and we talked for a couple hours, and I just told her at that particular time, because now I was in the state of, I was aching to actually know people that were Mormon and now were Christian, and kind of experience what they experienced and kind of have relate to them. So I was aching to find people like that. And so I told Sandra, I said, look, if you know anybody that I could talk to, I'll give you my phone number or contact, whatever. I would really like to talk to people. And so she said, oh, well, you know what? Adams Road is in town. And she gave me the little flyer. And so I looked at all the dates, and there were dates when every single time they were in the Salt Lake area, I couldn't be there. I had to work. And I'm like, because they were having in fact, one of the times was the Mission Church they were going to. One of the nights was the Mission Church that they were going to. And, but I wasn't able to attend any of them. So I told, and she says, well, if you don't mind, she says, Micah Wilder's parents are traveling with them this time. I'll pass your number on to them. I said, yeah, feel free to do it. And so on my way home, I didn't even get home, and Lynn Wilder called me on the phone, and we talked a little bit, and so I set up a appointment to have lunch with them on Sunday. And so on Sunday morning, when my wife woke up she'd worked Saturday night. No, it was Friday, and then I told her on Sunday we got a lunch appointment with, she was a former BYU professor that's now a Mormon, now a Christian, used to be Mormon, now a Christian. And she just about fainted, just like, why do you do this to me? I'm like, it'll be fun, it'll be really good. And so she agreed, and she was still in a cloud of just trying to figure, when am I going to hit solid ground when I know I'm planted on something? So we had lunch with them, and it was really good. And she just said, "Would you guys? I know a lady that used to be Mormon, is now a Christian, and has a son on a mission. And would you like to talk to them?" Yeah, that would be great. Well, that was Leslie that went to the Mission Church. We had dinner with her, and I just said, what church do you go to? And she says, oh, it's the Mission Church, and she told us where it was at. And so so that was the first church I went to. It's the Mission Church. I told my wife, I said, I'm going to go to church. She said, I'm not ready to go. Just you go ahead and go. And I said, okay, that's fine. I'll go check it out. And I never stepped foot inside a church, so I had no clue what that was all about. And I remember driving down there and turned in the parking lot and thought, oh man, I can't do this. So I turned around, and then I got a little bit down the road. I'm like, nah, it's never going to get easier. So I turned back around and went in the parking lot and went in, and it was just they were really small back then, but it was it was a good experience, and And from there, I tried several other churches. I really liked the preaching of Rich had here at the Mission Church, and so I said, I think I want to go back to that church. And so then Diane came with me near the end of that year, and she just loved it. And the rest, as they say, is history. That's pretty much that's kind of the foundation of how I became a Christian. What grieves me the most is how many Mormons just become atheists. That grieves me a lot to see that. It's like, why? Especially, it was really hard for me to understand because when I first came out, I saw the evidence was like, man, there's like a lot of evidence. It's not like I'm being a fool. This has evidence. And so it grieves me when I see a gloss over of the evidence and people saying, oh yeah, it doesn't really matter. All that kind of Christianity is kind of just like Mormonism. Oh no, it's not at all like Mormonism. Nothing at all like Mormonism. It's completely different than Mormonism. And so that's a sad thing to me. And I just pray that more people will see the nature of the false religion that Mormonism is, and have the courage to go down the road and investigate those things, and then I guess the most thing is turn to God. Turn to God. Just ask God to open your eyes. Open the eyes of the blind is the prayer I would always say. Lord, open the eyes of the blind, because that's what you are, is you're blind. And when I would read the Bible as a Mormon, I didn't see these things because I was blind. I couldn't see them. I would read over those, and I never could see them. But when God opens your eyes, you have new eyes. And it's like, now I can see, just like the blind man that can. I once was blind and now I see, and that's exactly what it was like. I was blind and now I see. And so it's been a beautiful adventure, even though it's been difficult to unthread all these things in my life. And then the hard part also was, you have friends, and I have my own children, and it's just like now I've taught them, raised them that this is true, and now they're adults. How do you undo that? That's the difficult part, and it's been very difficult to accept that, and then figure out how to continually plant the seeds and let the Lord work in their lives, And at first I was a bit zealous with them, and just like, I got to see, if they just need to see, if they will see, if I can present the evidence to them in a way that is winsome enough, they will see that what I'm saying is correct. And if you're blind, you can't see. And that was the hard part, is just they wouldn't see. And I never stopped praying for them, and continually to pray for them and look for every opportunity to plant seeds. But that's difficult. But praise God, every day I praise God that He opened the eyes of my wife at near the same time, so that we could both come on this together, because there's many people that it isn't that way, and that's got to be a challenging thing. I mean, it's challenging to not have any one of my children, but to not have my wife with me would have been very challenging. And so I thank God every day that we will both be able to come to see the truth. If you would like to meet with somebody that's been there where you're at, there are plenty of people that you can reach out to, and people are eager. I am eager. I'm eager to meet with anybody that has been a Mormon, that would like to know what the gospel is. I'd be more than happy to talk to them. I know that there's a host of other people in our church that would. A lot of other people, we can get them in contact with other people that if they're in different areas of the city or in other states or whatever. I think it'd be very helpful for them to talk to a Christian walk through some things with them and maybe help them a little bit. I think that can be of benefit. Don't be afraid to look for truth.